The girl in the wheelchair hadn't spoken in 4 days. Not to her father, not to the nurses, not even to herself. But when her eyes landed on the man sharpening a chisel under the open mountain sun, something in her gaze flickered like a match catching air for the first time in years. He didn't look like a miracle worker. Just a man in a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, sanding down the leg of a rocking chair he'd built from scratch. But Sarah Monroe, paralyzed from the waist down, couldn't stop watching him. And Richard Monroe, billionaire CEO of Monroe Tech, and her father, stood beside her in silence, silently praying that this stranger, this Carpenter, could succeed where the world's top neurologists had failed. Richard hadn't planned to beg anyone. That wasn't in his nature. But desperation makes proud men kneel, and when you've watched your daughter wither for 2 years behind hospital walls, there's no ego left to defend. He'd heard the rumors. A man in a remote town who once performed miracles in operating rooms before vanishing without a trace. He arrived unannounced, stepping into the scent of cedar and sawdust, and asked one question, "Are you Michael Lane?" The man looked up slowly, calloused hands, calm eyes, and a tiredness that came from somewhere much deeper than lack of sleep. "Used to be," he replied simply. Michael hadn't treated a patient in 7 years. Not since the night he lost his wife on the table, under his own hands. He'd been the best. A rising star in neurosurgery. Featured in journals, invited to symposiums, courted by elite hospitals. And then one mistake, one heartbeat too late, and the woman he loved more than anything slipped away. So he walked away from medicine, from life as he knew it, and built a world quiet enough for his daughter Cassidy to grow without the shadow of death hovering. Now, Richard Monroe stood in his driveway, holding the weight of his broken daughter in his voice. "I don't need a doctor," Richard said. "I need someone who hasn't given up yet." Sarah sat in the back seat, her face blank, hands curled in her lap. She hadn't protested when her father brought her here because protesting meant caring, and caring hurt more than the paralysis. She had stopped believing in anything the day the accident happened. One moment, she was sprinting down the track, Ivy League scouts in the stands. The next, steel, fire, and silence. Everything since then felt like a dream she couldn't wake from. Until she saw the man with the chisel. Michael didn't say yes that day. He didn't say much at all. Instead, he invited them to stay for tea. Cassidy, barefoot and bright-eyed, brought out lemon muffins she'd made herself. She handed one to Sarah without hesitation and smiled as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Sarah hesitated, then took it. It was the first voluntary motion she'd made in weeks. Michael noticed. So did Richard. And Cassidy, noticing her father's gaze linger longer than usual, simply whispered, "She's not broken, Dad, just stuck." The sun was setting by the time Richard stood to leave. Michael walked them to the car, silence hanging between two men who both carried unbearable grief in different forms. Just before opening the car door, Richard paused. "You're not a doctor anymore," he said softly. Michael nodded. "I'm not." "Then don't be one," Richard whispered. "Just help her be whole again." That night, as wind whispered through the pines and the moonlight spilled across sawdust-covered floors, Michael Lane stood alone in his workshop. He looked at the empty chair in the corner, his wife's, then at his daughter's sleeping form in the cabin above, then at the untouched tools laid out before him. His hands trembled. But then, he reached out and picked up the same chisel he'd once used to carve her crib. Sarah Monroe hadn't set foot in a hospital in months, because there was nothing left to say. No more scans. No more tests. No more hope. Her father's jets had flown her across oceans chasing miracle cures. She'd seen specialists in Switzerland, Japan, and California. But each time, it ended the same. Incomplete spinal cord injury. T10 2 L1. No motor response. They always said it gently, like breaking news to a child. And Sarah, always responded with silence. But now, for reasons she couldn't explain, she found herself rolling across a wooden ramp into the warm clutter of a carpenter's workshop somewhere deep in the mountains, where the air smelled of pine and cedar oil. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't hate the way it felt. Michael Lane didn't speak much that morning. He didn't offer false comfort, didn't ask how she was feeling, didn't pretend this was going to be easy. Instead, he handed her a smooth block of maple, laid out a piece of sandpaper, and said only this, "Make it soft." Sarah looked at him like he'd lost his mind. She was paralyzed. He knew that. Her legs didn't work. What did sanding wood have to do with any of this? But something in his tone made her pause. Not commanding, not pitiful, just steady. So she took the block with her unsteady hands and began. The minutes ticked by like falling sawdust. The room was quiet, except for Cassidy's giggles as she painted in the corner and the faint scraping of Sarah's effort. And as her fingers moved across the surface, Sarah noticed something she hadn't felt in a long time: heat. Not from pain, from effort, from engagement. Her muscles remembered things her brain had forgotten. Michael watched from the far end of the table, not interrupting, just watching, measuring. He saw the tremble in her wrist, the tightness in her shoulders. But more than anything, he saw intent. And that was more than any MRI had shown in 2 years. Later that day, while Cassidy napped upstairs and Richard took a tense phone call by the trees, Sarah sat alone with Michael in the shop. He placed a carved wooden figure in front of her, a ballerina, arms raised, frozen in mid-spin. Sarah stared at it. "My wife danced," he said quietly. "After the surgery failed, I carved this. I wasn't ready to let her stop moving." The weight of his words pressed into her like gravity. "What happened?" she asked finally. Michael didn't flinch. "I let grief become silence. I let silence become truth. And I walked away before it buried me too." Then he looked at her. Really looked at her. "But you're not buried yet, Sarah. You're still breathing. That means you can choose what happens next." That night, Sarah didn't cry. She didn't smile either. But she did something she hadn't done since the accident she wrote in her journal. Just 3 words. "I felt something." Meanwhile, Richard stood outside under the stars, phone pressed to his ear, listening as the board of directors debated his sanity. "You're hiding her in the woods with some ex-doctor no one can verify. If this gets out, the company will be shredded." But Richard didn't respond. He just stared at the warm glow inside the shop, where his daughter, his paralyzed daughter, was holding a paintbrush. And something deep inside him whispered, "Let them talk." The next morning, Sarah arrived early. This time, no one told her to come. She just did. Michael greeted her with a small nod, placed a heavier plank in front of her, and said, "We'll try standing tomorrow. For now, work the arms." Sarah blinked. "Standing?" Michael shrugged. "Don't worry about standing. Worry about sanding." And so she did. As muscle memory returned in fragments, something else began to wake. Her will. Her fire. Her belief that this story, her story, might not be over. But far from the workshop, in the heart of the city, a journalist opened a manila envelope dropped anonymously at his desk. Inside, a name, a photo, and an old malpractice report. Headline: Disgraced neurosurgeon found living in seclusion, treating billionaire's daughter. He smiled. This is going to explode. Michael Lane wasn't a miracle worker. But by day 6, Sarah Monroe was gripping the side of the workbench on her feet. Her legs trembled. Her breath hitched. But she stood. Even if just for 3 seconds. And when she collapsed back into the chair, sweat lining her brow, Michael didn't rush to help. He knelt, leveled his eyes to hers, and said softly, "You didn't fall. You stood. Then Saturday. There's a difference." Sarah blinked, heart pounding in her ears. Her hands clenched the edge of the bench tighter than they had ever clenched anything since the crash. She didn't cry, but her lip trembled. Because for the first time since the world shattered, she believed in her body again. Richard Monroe stood in the doorway, watching the scene unfold, with disbelief clouded by awe. He hadn't told Michael yet about the leaked report. Hadn't shown him the article that had gone live an hour earlier. Disgraced neurosurgeon performs unlicensed treatment on tech CEO's daughter. The headline was already trending. Photos of Michael's surgical past were paired with footage of the cabin tucked in the mountains. Speculation, outrage, legal warnings. The board was demanding damage control, but Richard couldn't look away from his daughter. Not when she was laughing. Not when she looked more alive than she had in 2 years. What price is reputation if your child finds life again? That evening, Michael closed the workshop early. His hands were rough, his back sore, but his mind heavy. Cassidy noticed it first. She sat across from him at dinner, nibbling at mashed potatoes, watching her father's eyes darken like storm clouds. "Did something happen?" she asked quietly. Michael looked up, then sighed. "Not yet. But it's coming." He knew what kind of world Richard Monroe came from. He'd spent enough time in surgical boardrooms to recognize the scent of political blood. And the moment Sarah's story became public, that world would come hunting. The next morning, Michael woke early. Before dawn, before birdsong, before memory had the chance to settle on his chest. He opened a small wooden box in the back of the shop. Inside, surgical tools, polished steel, cold, impossibly familiar. He hadn't touched them in years, not since. He snapped the box shut. Number. This wasn't about surgery. This was about something deeper, slower, human, and it was working. But back in the city, chaos was unraveling fast. Grace Holloway, Richard's legal advisor, stormed into the CEO's office with fire in her eyes and a folder in her hands. Michael Lane's medical license was never revoked, she snapped. He surrendered it, voluntarily, no malpractice ruling, just grief. That's it. Richard rubbed his temples. So technically, he hasn't broken any law? Grace hesitated. Number. But the media doesn't care, and your shareholders care even less. If you don't issue a statement, they will. He looked out the window, toward the mountains. Let them. Grace blinked. You're willing to go down for this? Richard didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, he gave my daughter a future. I can't buy that. I can only protect it. Meanwhile, Sarah was standing again. This time, for 5 full seconds. Michael placed a hand lightly on her back, not to hold her up, just to remind her he was there. Cassidy clapped from the corner, cheering wildly. Sarah grinned, breathless. I'm doing it. I'm actually doing it. And Michael, watching her legs quiver with life, said only, You're not walking yet, but you're not just surviving anymore either. That night, just after sunset, the inevitable happened. 2 black SUVs pulled up outside the cabin. Men in suits stepped out, flashing legal papers and cameras not far behind. Michael stepped outside, arms folded. Are you Michael Lane? One of them barked. You've been operating without medical clearance. He's not operating. A voice interrupted from behind. Sarah rolled to the porch, shoulders square, voice steady. He's teaching me how to live again, and if you try to stop him, you're going to have to answer to me. The air snapped with silence. Richard stepped forward from the trees. That's my daughter, he said simply. And I stand with her. The camera flashes were blinding. Sarah had never faced a press line before, especially not from a wheelchair, flanked by a carpenter and a tech billionaire. Michael stood on one side, calm but guarded. Richard on the other, chin raised, daring them to ask the wrong question. But it was Sarah who broke the silence. This man didn't promise me miracles, she said, voice clear, trembling only slightly. He didn't wear a white coat or hook me to machines. He gave me a piece of wood and told me to make it soft. The crowd shifted, confused, and that's when it started. I didn't need medicine. I needed to believe my body wasn't finished yet. Behind the lenses and microphones, no one dared speak. Until a reporter asked, "But Miss Monroe, he's not licensed anymore. What if he fails? What if he hurts you?" Sarah blinked once. "I've been hurting for 2 years. And the only thing that's helped was here, in that workshop. With him." And then, she looked directly into the cameras and whispered, "Sometimes healing doesn't look like medicine. Sometimes it looks like someone refusing to give up on you." Back at the cabin, the silence that followed was suffocating. Michael leaned against the railing, rubbing the edge of his jaw, eyes scanning the dark tree line. He hadn't wanted this. Not the spotlight. Not the war. He just wanted to help her stand. And now, the world was watching. Inside, Cassidy curled up beside Sarah, gently brushing her hair. "You were brave today," Cassidy whispered. Sarah smiled, thin and tired. "I was scared." "Me too. But brave people are still scared, they just do it anyway." That night, Michael sat in the shop alone. He stared at the ballerina carving on the shelf, the one that never spun. His hands shook as he reached for it. He whispered, almost to himself, "What if I mess this up again?" Behind him, a soft voice replied, "Then we fall, and we stand again." He turned. Sarah was there, bracing herself on her chair's arms, trying to rise. He rushed forward. "Wait." "No," she said, eyes locked on his. "Let me try." Her voice broke on the last word, but not from fear. From something deeper. Older. Stronger. Michael stepped back, and Sarah, gritting her teeth, arms shaking, stood. This time, she didn't collapse. The next morning, everything changed. News outlets reversed their tone. From exile to hope. Disgraced, surgeon helps. CEO's daughter walk again. Support poured in, online. Former patients, medical peers, even quiet apologies from critics who once condemned him. But one visitor didn't come with flowers. Grace Holloway arrived with legal forms and a warning. "The board wants your license reinstated, Michael," she said. "They want you back, under their control." Michael looked away. "That world, it took everything from me." "Then take something back," she said. "Your name, your truth, your second chance." That evening, Sarah stood at the edge of the porch. No walker. No chair. Just Michael's hand in reach but not touching. She looked out over the hills. And then, took one trembling step forward. Cassidy screamed in joy. Richard's hand flew to his mouth. Michael froze, unable to breathe. It was just one step. But it was her step. And it was enough to shatter everything that had once seemed impossible. Back in the city, the media now called her the girl who walked with the Carpenter. But in private, Sarah said something different to Cassidy that night. "I didn't walk because of him," she whispered. "I walked because he made me believe I could." Sarah Monroe's toe moved. Not a twitch, not a spasm, a deliberate, conscious signal from her brain to her body. It happened during a quiet moment, just her and Cassidy, while the sun filtered through the windows of Michael's shop. They were painting. Cassidy humming. Sarah laughing softly for the first time in years. And then, the brush slipped from her hand. Her leg jumped. Not from instinct, but will. She froze. "Cass, did you see that?" Cassidy blinked, then gasped. "You did it." Michael had heard the scream and ran downstairs. Breath caught in his throat. He found Sarah still in her chair, wide-eyed, breathing hard. She didn't speak. She simply pointed to her foot. Michael knelt, gently pressed her calf. "Again," he said softly. Sarah closed her eyes, concentrated, and her toe lifted just barely. But it moved. Michael didn't smile. Not yet. He looked up at her, tears shimmering in her lashes, and he whispered, "Then it's working." News of her progress spread like fire. This wasn't a fluke. This was recovery, real, measurable, undeniable. Requests poured in from families around the world. Parents with paralyzed children, war veterans, people who had lost hope. Michael refused them all. "This isn't a program," he said. "It's not a miracle factory. It's just one life, one soul, at a time." But the world didn't care. They wanted the man who made a girl walk again. And then came the call he feared most. The hospital board. They wanted him to return. Not as a tool, but as a symbol. A rebranded face of holistic medicine. Neurosurgeon meets craftsman. They offered full reinstatement. A grant. His own wing. A way back. Michael said no. Until one name changed everything. Children's Neurocenter. Pediatric cases. All non-responsive spinal injuries, Grace told him. "They're offering you a pilot program. You'd choose the patients, your method, your rules." Michael didn't respond. But later that night, as Sarah sat beside the fireplace and Cassidy dozed in his lap, he stared at his hands. The same hands that once shook with fear, now held the potential to heal again. But just as healing began to find its rhythm, a fracture opened. That night, after dinner, Richard pulled Michael aside. "There's something you need to know," he said slowly. "I wasn't the one who leaked your name to the press." Michael's body tensed. "Then who did?" Richard hesitated. "Grace." Silence fell. Michael's jaw clenched. "Why?" "She thought the world needed to see your method. She believed it would protect you. And she may have had company backing it." Michael stepped back. "She risked Sarah's safety to protect a brand. She risked everything so people like you don't get buried again." Michael didn't answer. But that night, he didn't sleep. The next morning, Sarah sensed the shift. Michael's voice was quieter, his eyes heavier. He didn't meet her gaze the same way. She confronted him in the shop. "You're leaving." He didn't deny it. "They want me back in the OR." "And what do you want?" He hesitated. "I want to do good." Her voice cracked. "You already are." That night, Michael packed a small bag. Not for a goodbye, just in case. He sat beside Cassidy, brushing her hair from her eyes. "If I go back, it won't be forever," he said. "Why do you have to go at all?" she whispered. He paused. "Because maybe there's more than one Sarah out there, and maybe I still have something to give." Cassidy looked away. "Just don't forget who you really are." But before the sun could rise on his decision, Sarah did something unexpected. She walked. Not a step, not a shuffle. She took 3 trembling, clumsy, miraculous steps across the shop floor toward him. No one else was there. No cameras. No applause. Just her, and the man who never stopped believing. She stopped in front of him, barely breathing, and whispered, "If you go, let it be because you believe, not because the world finally does." Michael closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, peace settled on his face. The world was waiting for his answer. But Michael Lane didn't rush. He stayed for one more sunrise. And that morning, he did what he always did. He made breakfast, braided Cassidy's hair, helped Sarah with her balance drills. Then he walked to the old oak bench behind the workshop, the one he carved after burying his wife. He Saturday closed his eyes and whispered, "Show me the right door." At the CEO's mansion, Richard Monroe paced. He had done everything. Given Michael his trust, his home, his daughter's life. But something in him still wondered, would he walk away? Sarah entered the room, slowly, still shaky, still holding the cane. But her eyes burned with fire. "You never believed I'd walk again." Richard blinked. "That's not true." "Yes, It island. She stepped closer. But he did. From the beginning. When you saw a chair, he saw a woman still standing. Across town, Michael stood before the hospital board. They greeted him like royalty. They offered him his own program, a full team, a generous salary. He listened. And when they were done, he said nothing. He simply slid a photo across the table. Sarah. Taking her first steps, Cassidy by her side. Both laughing. "This is what I do," he said. "Not for headlines, not for clinics, for people. You can have your lab, your foundation, but I'm staying where healing started." 2 months later, the Monroe Lane Center for Holistic Recovery opened its doors. Not a hospital, not a clinic, but a place where forgotten souls found hope again. No white coats, no bright lights, just wood, warmth, compassion, and faith. Sarah became the first resident therapist, teaching others to believe again. Cassidy ran the art room, painting hope onto broken walls. And Michael? He was the carpenter, the healer, the father who stayed. One rainy evening, Grace returned. She stood at the door, uncertain. Michael didn't slam it. He didn't scold her. He handed her a cup of tea. She whispered, "I'm sorry. I just didn't want the world to forget you." Michael smiled gently. "Then help me make sure they don't forget them." Later that week, Sarah reached the garden without a cane. She laughed as Cassidy cheered. Michael watched from the porch, eyes misting. She turned to him, glowing. "You didn't just help me walk," she said. "You helped me live." He stepped forward, pulled both of them into his arms. And, for the first time, the grief in his heart didn't feel like a weight, but a bridge to everything ahead. The once lonely carpenter's shop now glows like a home. Laughter, healing, life. One man's pain turned into a place where the broken rise again. Over the door, carved in smooth cedar, hope is handcrafted.